Hi guys, and welcome to this session on Kubernetes installation by Intellipaat. As you may already know, most of the organizations today have started using containers for deployment purposes. So it's high time that we learn about container orchestration tools. Today, we talk about one such tool called Kubernetes. But before we get into the installation of it, please subscribe to our channel to never miss an update from Intellipaat. Also guys, we do provide end-to-end training on Kubernetes. So if you are interested, please check out the course details given in the description below. Now, let's get into the session.
There are a lot of ways to install Kubernetes, guys. We are going to discuss all those ways, right? And out of that, we're going to choose one way which is going to be preferable for all of us. So let's go ahead and start with the session, guys. So guys, now Kubernetes is basically, like I said, can be installed in a lot of ways. So you can install it by kubeadm, you can install it by Minikube, you can install it by KOps, or you can also use Kubernetes on GCP. So these are the most popular ways of installing Kubernetes. Of course, you'll also have the option of installing Kubernetes on Azure or other cloud platforms. On AWS, for example, there is also a dedicated service called EKS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service. So we're not getting into it. Reason being, once you understand what Kubernetes is, it'll be very easy for you to basically understand those aspects of Kubernetes as well. So basically, first we should understand the core of Kubernetes, how we can start working with Kubernetes, and then we can explore the other options as well, which are available on other clouds. Okay. So the first method of installing Kubernetes is kubeadm. Now guys, kubeadm is a method using which we can install Kubernetes on any bare metal server. So it need not have to be on premise, it need not have to be on cloud, on AWS, or Azure, or on GCP. It can be any generic server, right? It could be a server on Google Cloud, it could be a server on Azure, it could be a server on-premise. On all the systems, this installation will work, right? It could be a VM also, which is running inside your computer. On that also, this bare metal installation will work, right? So that is kubeadm. The second way is Minikube. Now guys, Minikube is basically a virtualized environment in which you don't have to create any slave nodes or you don't have to create any master node. You just download the Minikube software and it will virtualize an environment of Kubernetes for you, right? It's a great way for basically practicing Kubernetes, but it's not so great if you want to learn Kubernetes in depth as to how it works, what happens if you play around with different components. If you want to get into all those details, then Minikube is not that of a great choice. But yes, if you want to practice Kubernetes commands and everything, then Minikube is going to be helpful for you, because you can basically get started by having installed Minikube on your system, and you don't have to worry about any cloud or any virtual system as such. Okay. Then our next way of installing Kubernetes on AWS is KOps. So guys, KOps is basically shortcut for installing Kubernetes, but it's exclusively only for AWS, right? So if you want to install or want to get started with Kubernetes on AWS, you can use KOps. But the problem with KOps is that by default, it deploys the instances to be of T2.medium or T2.large. I'm not sure, but those instances, they do not fall under the free tier. All right. So because they do not fall under the free tier, it diminishes our perspective of how we want to learn tools, right? So all the tools that we have learned so far will absolutely work on the free tier of AWS. But if you are installing Kubernetes using the KOps way, then in that case, you will not be able to utilize the free tier of AWS. Okay. Then we have our next way of installing it on or having it set up is Kubernetes on GCP, right? Now, like I said, Kubernetes is a product of the Google Cloud or the Google company, right? And Google company also have their own Google Cloud platform. So on that platform, Kubernetes as a service is also available, right? And you don't have to get into all the details of how to install Kubernetes and everything. Everything is set up for you automatically. You can just get started by using or by throwing kubectl commands on your GCP server and it will work like a charm. But again, in that sense, it would not be that much beneficial for people who basically want to set up Kubernetes in their company, or they are probably a DevOps architect or a DevOps engineer whose sole responsibility is to manage the life cycle, and he only has to deal with setting up all the tools in his his company. So for that kind of a person, it'll be half knowledge because he will only get to know how to use Kubernetes and he will know how to set up Kubernetes from scratch. Okay, so guys, these were all the ways or all the popular ways of setting up Kubernetes to get started with it. But like I said, we are going to use the KubeADM way because I guess that will be the most beneficial for all the people, right? Whether it be a person who wants to understand how Kubernetes works from scratch, or a person who is a DevOps engineer and whose job would be to set up the DevOps lifecycle. And also, I guess it will be beneficial for people who only just want to work on Kubernetes, because even then, this knowledge is going to be helpful for you in the future. All right. So let's start with the installation, guys. So what I'll do is I'll jump onto my AWS management console. Let's start from way scratch. We don't even have our instances ready. So what we'll do is we'll click on launch instance and let's select our OS to be Ubuntu. Okay, and then we'll choose the t2.micro instance. We'll click on configure instance details and let's launch 2 instances over here. Let's just specify the number 2 and then just move on to security groups and specify a security group which you basically want your instance to have. So in my security group, I have defined all traffic enabled so that there's no problem between the clusters or the nodes to interact with each other. What you can do from a security perspective is that maybe both these instances could have different security groups. So what you can do is you can allow all traffic from that particular security group which is going to serve your slave, and all your slaves could basically be a part of that particular security group. Okay, that is a way that you can do. I'm just doing this way because our purpose is to learn DevOps and not get into the AWS details. Okay, so we'll click on review and launch now, and you can review all the details that you have configured over here. And once you've done that, just click on launch, select the key pair that you have on your system and click on launch instances, right? So this will basically deploy your instances on AWS, right? So your instances are now getting deployed. Let's tag them as kmaster for Kubernetes master and knode for Kubernetes node. Okay, so our instances are now getting started, guys. So knode is now in a running state, and if I refresh it, I can see both of these are now in the running state. So I'll choose kmaster, I'll choose the IP address, and let's try connecting to this instance first. So we'll click on yes, and this will basically bring us to the login page. So we'll log into this instance. Yes, we are in. Alright, so we are on our kmaster. Let's similarly log into our knode as well. So this is the IP address for knode. Let's open a new session on Putty for this. And let's color code it so that we can differentiate between the master and the slave. Okay, so my slave is orange in color, guys. So we'll remember that for our future references. Alright, awesome. So we have logged into both our master and on our slave. Alright, now although you will be having a document in your LMS, but the way I prefer to install Kubernetes is by going to the official documentation. So you just have to type in install KubeADM and then you will have the official doc over here. Just click on that and let me walk you through how you can use this particular documentation. Okay. So I've read all of this, so I know what is written everywhere. If you have a setup like mine, wherein you have an Ubuntu OS, right, and you want to install Kubernetes on it, you can straight away jump to installing the components. But before these components, you will have to install Docker, right? So let's install Docker, guys, on both our systems. So as we studied in the architecture that Docker is a common component among the master and the slave. So let's update the machine that we are going to work on first. Sudo apt-get update on master and similarly on slave as well. Okay, so master is updated. Now let's install Docker on it. Sudo apt-get install docker.io. So Docker is getting installed on this system. Similarly, let's install Docker on our slave as well. So sudo apt-get install docker.io. Okay, so Docker is getting installed on the slave as well. On the master, it is installed. Now, once you've installed Docker, your job is done. Just follow the documentation now. So the first step would be to execute these commands. And these commands, as is mentioned, is for Ubuntu, right? So if you're using some other OS like CentOS, or if you're using a container for Linux, you can use these respective tabs. But I'm using it for Ubuntu. So hence, I would use these commands. And all these commands have to be run as sudo, guys. So let's sudo up. And now let's copy these commands. So let's execute the first command. So it's being executed, and let's run it on the slave as well. So let's sudo up on the slave as well. And now let's copy this command and run it. Alright, so I guess our master is ready. So let's copy the second command now. On our master, we'll paste this command. It's done. On our slave, we'll paste this command. It's done. Now let's move on to a third command, which is all these three files or all these three lines will go along each other. So let's copy these lines, paste it on our master. It's done. Paste it on our slave. It's done. Awesome. Now let's update our machine. So we'll copy this command, run it on the master, so it's getting updated. Similarly, run it on my slave as well. Okay, awesome. So on my master and on my slave, I have to run all these commands. So once we're done with the update, we'll start by installing Kubernetes. So let's install first it on our master. So it's getting installed over here. Similarly, let's install it on our slave as well. So it's getting installed over here as well. Okay, so once these components are installed, like it's installed on my master successfully, our next step would be to basically initialize Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is now successfully installed on your master and slave, but what do we do with the installation? We'll have to initialize it so that the slave and the master both are connected to each other and there are no issues. Now, in order to initialize the Kubernetes cluster, now you don't have to worry about the slave. The slave would only be once used just to connect to the master. Other than that, all the commands will now run on the master. Okay, this basically step would be only used if you're not using Docker and you're using some other container software. If you're using Docker, you don't have to worry about this, right? The next step is to basically create a cluster, that is initialize a cluster using kubeadm. So click on this, and then this would be the documentation for the second step. Now in our second step, guys, what we have to do is just jump on to initializing your master. Okay, so now we'll be using kubeadm init command to basically initialize our cluster. So I'll type in kubeadm init, and this is my master, guys. Kubeadm init. Next command would be API server advertise address. Copy this. So this basically requires your IP address for master. So you can give the private IP address as well. So we'll give the private IP address, which is this. Let's copy it, paste it here. Once you have the API server advertised address, the next step is to basically have the pod network CIDR. So I told you while we were discussing the architecture, guys, that on Kubernetes basically works on its own network. It has its own network on which it will work. So this network is called the pod network. Okay, and in this particular command that is using pod network CIDR, we basically define the range in which the IP addresses would be allotted for the Kubernetes network to function. So the range that we want to specify is 192.168.0.0. Why? Because the Kubernetes network, when it works, it needs a plugin for that network to get installed, right? Now there are a lot of plugins that you can choose from. So if you go back to our documentation, you can just scroll down and you will see that you have these plugins. So these plugins are basically your network plugins that you can use. So you have plugins like Calico, Canal, Kilium, Flannel, KubeRouter, Romana, ViveNet, Juniper, right? So what I prefer, my preference is Calico. And for Calico to work, the pod network CIDR should be in this range. 192.168.0.0/16, right? So if you want to install Calico as your network plugin, then you would be defining this particular range, and that is why I'm defining this range on my master as well right now. So 192.168.0.0/16. So once you've specified this, guys, just hit enter. And now you will get a warning. Warning would be error in the number of CPU. The number of available CPU is 1 less than the required 2. So on the Kubernetes master, by default, you need 2 cores for your master to run successfully. But since we are basically just practicing on Kubernetes, what we can do is we can ignore this check. We can ignore this pre-flight check. So we'll type in ignore and then pre-flight errors. Okay, and then you specify the name of the error. So the name of the error is num CPU. Okay, let's copy that. That's it. That's all you have to specify. Let's hit enter now. So as you can see, the process has now started. So basically your Kubernetes is now getting initialized on your master. And once it gets initialized, like you saw in Docker Swarm, the moment it gets initialized, it gives you a token command, which is basically used to connect any node on the network to connect to the master so that it becomes a part of the cluster. Okay. Similarly, you will get a command over here as well when this particular initialization is complete. So what we'll do is we'll just take that particular command and we'll paste it on a slave, which will basically just then connect to our cluster. So let's wait for this command to get completed and then we'll move forward. Alright guys, so our command is now complete. Okay, so this is the token that we have got. So this is the token that we will be basically passing on or executing on my slave so that Kubernetes runs or it connects to my master. Okay, now in order to run this command, just copy it. And now let's go to our slave. This is my slave, guys. Again, because it's a kubeadm command, we'll have to run it in root. Copy the command and let's hit enter. So it says this node has joined the cluster now, and we can see the nodes over here. But right now, for any command that you want to now use on Kubernetes, you will be using kubectl. So kubeadm's work was only till over here to basically set up the cluster for you. Now because the cluster is set up, now the only commands that we will be using is kubectl. Okay, now in order to use kubectl on the normal user, what you have to do is I'll exit it. Now I am on the $prompt. Now if I use kubectl right now, you will get an error. Let's see what that error is. Right, so it says that type the command kubectl get nodes. Correct, so let's type that command kubectl get nodes. If I hit enter now, you will get an error. The connection to the server localhost 8080 was refused. You always get this error when you have not configured your server properly. Now how can you configure your cluster properly? Now you got this kubeadm command, right? When basically your command was successfully executed. So along with that, there were several other instructions which came over here, which we did not read. So what are those instructions? Your Kubernetes master has initialized successfully. So start using your cluster. You need to run the following as a regular user. So you have to run these 3 commands as a regular user, and only then you will be able to work with your cluster. So let's copy these commands. This is the first command, this is the second command, and this is your third command. So let's copy these commands. Awesome. So now, since you have executed all these 3 commands, if you type in kubectl get nodes now, you will get all the 2 nodes which are there on your cluster. But as you can see over right now, the status of these nodes is not ready. The reason for that is that we have not installed the network plugin. So there is no network on my cluster right now. It's just the master and the slave which are connected to each other. Now for installing the network, what I'll do is just take these commands, kubectl apply, copy these and run it on your master. So this is done. Similarly, you'll run this command, run it over here. So it's done. Now your network plugin is getting initialized, and how you can check the status, you can just type in the command kubectl. So everything in Kubernetes which is basically running is running as a pod. What is a pod? We'll discuss that in a little while. For now, if you want to check the status, just type in kubectl get pods and then hyphen all namespaces. Okay, you type in this, hit enter, and now you can check the status over here. As you can see, all the pods are in the status running state, and all of them are running. 2 out of 2, 2 out of 2, 1 out of 1, 1 out of 1. Every pod is running. That basically means your cluster is now ready. So if I type in kubectl get nodes now, if I hit enter, you can see that both my nodes, that is this node and this node, is in the ready state. Okay, so they are in the ready state. That means my cluster is now ready to accept commands to deploy applications on it, right? So we'll do that in a little while in our further sessions. For now, let's come back to our slides. All right, guys. So we have successfully installed Kubernetes. We have configured Kubernetes so that it's in its prime state to basically accept any kind of commands, any kind of deployments on it, right? And that was our purpose in this particular session. So thanks a lot for attending today's session, guys. In our next session, before starting to work with Kubernetes, we'll basically understand how the resources, or what are the resources that we are going to define on Kubernetes so as to our application gets up and ready.
So this brings us to the end of this session. If you have any queries, please leave a comment down below and we'll reach out to you immediately. Also guys, please subscribe to our channel to never miss an update from Intellipaat. Thank you.